Good day, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 MMA Pharmacy Practice State of the Market webinar. I'm your moderator, Michelle Conberry. Before we get started, I have a quick reminder regarding our webinar technology. All participant audio lines are muted, but we welcome you to share your questions through the Q&A feature found in your Zoom control panel. We will address all questions at the end of the webinar. This webinar is also being recorded, and a copy of the recording along with details on how to access HRCI and SHRM credits will be sent out following today's presentation. Today's panel will discuss the hottest trends in pharmacy benefit world. We have some updates on federal and state regulations that are likely to impact self-funded plans in the next year or two. We will also discuss specialty medications, including the pipeline for biosimilars, gene therapy, and the newer risk protection programs. From there, we will wrap up with a brief discussion around one of the newer trends in pharmacy, carve-out specialty, and also bolt-on prescription benefits programs. But before we jump into the first topic, we do have some exciting news to share with you. One of the co-leaders of the pharmacy practice, Lynn Moakley, has retired. After over 30 years in the insurance world, 11 of which she spent building this pharmacy practice, Lynn decided it was time to slow down and focus on those most important to her, her husband and their 2 children. We wish her the best in this new adventure. With that said, Shannon LaBarre, who many of you already know as the co-leader of the pharmacy practice, will be stepping in as pharmacy practice leader. So now I'll turn it over to Shannon to kick us off with our conversation for today.
Thanks, Michelle. To add to that exciting news, after years of being known as Tryon RX and just the MMA pharmacy practice, we're happy to announce our rebranding of the pharmacy practice. As many of you know, Tryon RX was originally started as a coalition to support Tryon accounts. Over the past few years, Lynn and I have grown that practice from a coalition to a fully engaged pharmacy practice, supporting clients with everything from the coalition to full RFPs, contract negotiations, plan design support, and support for our clients and their members when escalated issues arise. We believe we have successfully reimagined what a fully engaged pharmacy practice in the benefit consulting world should look like. Therefore, we are rebranding our practice as Reimagine RX. You may also see a few names that you haven't been introduced to in the past. Today, I'm joined by Greg Shank, our pharmacy benefit financial analyst, and Michelle Cortazzo, our pharmacy account manager. But enough bookkeeping, let's jump in. So where does your healthcare dollar go? We have used this slide in almost every presentation in the past few years for a reason. Healthcare in general is a huge portion of your plan spend every year. Pharmacy has been sitting around 20% of the total cost of healthcare for most plans, and it's going to continue to grow in the years to come without a decrease or shift from medical. Many of you have heard me say this in the past. The medication market is amazing. We have new medications coming to the market that are saving lives. And I once heard someone say that we're living in Jetson science with a Flintstone distribution model. And while some of you may not understand that reference, it does still perfectly capture the industry. Life-saving medications with extremely high cost for treatment and confusing procurement process. And thankfully, that's our job to help you understand the industry, even if that means a few tears and some new gray hairs on my behalf. I'm going to pass it over to Greg to talk about a few of the recent federal legislation and the impact on the market.
Thanks, Shannon. First, we'll start with the No Surprises Act and what it is. The No Surprises Act is part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act and was signed into law December of 2020. These laws are structured to provide insight and protect consumers against prescription drug and healthcare spending. The NSA grants consumers federal protections against unexpected medical bills, prohibits balance billing for certain out-of-network care, and changes billing and reimbursement processes. Overall, the CAA requires federal agencies to issue rules of cost transparency regarding healthcare and prescription coverage. The No Surprises Act transparency requirements. Among the many different transparency requirements, the NSA specifically affects employer-provided health coverage for healthcare and prescription drug spending, an advanced explanation of benefits requirement, and ID card disclosure requirements for medical and RX. The insurance carriers and PBMs will handle most of the required reporting data and are able to fulfill the reporting on behalf of group health plans. It would be a good idea to contractually delegate reporting to insurance carriers. Next, we have prescription drug data collection of the Consolidated Appropriations Act. We know that prescription drug spend is rising faster than total spend on healthcare services, and the government is trying to understand the reason behind these increases by learning more about the inner workings of prescription drug costs. The CAA is requiring information to be submitted on the following topics: spending on healthcare services, including prescription drugs that account for the majority of employer and patient costs, prescription drugs that are prescribed at a frequency greater than others, prescription drug rebates from manufacturers, and costs and premiums allocated to patient spending. The government is looking to accumulate data from both insurance companies and employer-based health plans, and this is to help call out key indicators and increases in prescription drug and healthcare spending, and to understand how prescription drug rebates and impact insurance premiums and out-of-pocket costs. The deadline for submission is December 27, 2022. This submission requires a calendar year of reporting for both 2020 and 2021. Findings will be published about prescription data pricing trends and how prescription drug rebates impact patient out-of-pocket costs. The release date is yet to be determined, but they will be found on the Department of Labor or the Department of Treasury's website. Next is the PBM Transparency Act of 2022. The Transparency Act would make it illegal for PBMs to engage in spread pricing, which is the act of charging a payer a different amount for the prescription drugs, ingredient costs, and dispensing fee than the amount the PBM reimburses to the pharmacy and where the PBM keeps the difference. And make it illegal and arbitrarily and unfairly and deceptively claw back any amounts of the reimbursement payment to a pharmacist or pharmacy, or adjust fees by lowering or raising them along with reimbursements to a pharmacy to offset reimbursement changes under any federally funded health plan. The Transparency Act is looking to incentivize transparency with PBMs if they are passing through 100% of price concessions to the health plan or payer. It wants the PBM to provide complete disclosure of the cost, price, and reimbursement of prescription drugs to each health plan, payer, and pharmacy, all fees, markups, and discounts the PBM charges or imposes on each health plan, payer, and pharmacy. And finally, the aggregate compensation the PBM receives from drug manufacturers, including any rebate, discount, administration fee, and any other payment or credit obtained or retained by the PBM. The reporting requirements for the Transparency Act include the total amount of spread pricing the PBM has retained, the total amount of any generic effective rate fee charged to each pharmacy, direct and indirect compensation fee charged, if any payment was rescinded or otherwise clawed back from a reimbursement made to a pharmacy, an explanation of the reason why a drug was moved or reassigned from one drug tier to another, including how and why the tier move was determined or requested by a prescription drug manufacturer or other entity. And if during the reporting year, the PBM moved a prescription drug to a formulary tier that has a higher cost sharing for the patient or a lower reimbursement to the pharmacy, why did the PBM make this move and what's its reason? If any PBM owns, controls, or is affiliated with a pharmacy, the government needs to report describing any difference in reimbursement rates or practices, direct and indirect compensation fees, and any clawbacks between the PBM-owned pharmacy and other pharmacies. The FTC will submit 2 reports to Congress with this data. The first report will be an annual report focused mainly on the number and the outcome of enforcement actions, along with policy recommendations to strengthen future enforcement efforts. The second report would address the policies, practice, and roles of the PBMs with regard to formulary placement and design. And most notably, evaluating whether PBMs are using formulary design and placement to increase gross revenue without simultaneously increasing patient access and reducing patient costs, as well as whether PBM practices violate the Federal Trade Commission Act. And lastly, on August 16th, 2022, President Biden signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which includes a broad package of health, tax, and climate change provisions. The Inflation Reduction Act includes 2 policies that are designed to have a direct impact on drug prices. It requires the federal government to negotiate prices for some high-cost drugs covered under Medicare, and it requires drug manufacturers to pay rebates to Medicare if they increase prices faster than inflation for drugs used by Medicare beneficiaries. The Inflation Reduction Act includes several key provisions that will reduce out-of-pocket spending for Medicare beneficiaries. It caps Medicare beneficiaries' out-of-pocket spending under the Medicare Part D benefit, first by eliminating coinsurance above the catastrophic threshold in 2024, and then adding a $2,000 cap on spending in 2025. Beginning in 2023, it limits cost sharing for insulin to $35 per month for people in Medicare. And also in 2023, it eliminates cost sharing for adult vaccines covered under Medicare Part D and improves access to adult vaccines under Medicaid and CHIP. In 2024, it expands the eligibility for full Part D low-income subsidiaries, or LIS, and low-income beneficiaries with incomes up to 150% of the poverty rate, and repeals the partial LIS benefit currently in place for individuals with incomes between 135 and 150% above the federal poverty rate. The Inflation Reduction Act also includes a provision to further delay implementation of the Trump administration's drug rebate rule until 2032, rather than have it take effect in 2027. The rebate rule would eliminate the anti-kickback safe harbor protections for prescription drug rebates negotiated between drug manufacturers, pharmacy benefit managers, or health plan sponsors in Medicare Part D. The rebate rule was estimated to increase Medicare spending and premiums paid by beneficiaries. And now I'll pass it back to Shannon to elaborate on state PBM regulation and ERISA preemption.
Thanks, Greg. There have been a few state cases that have made headlines over the past year, but it all started with one case. Rutledge versus PCMA has led the way for other states tired of federal inaction. Prior to this case, PBMs always argued that they were not subject to state regulations. There was protection under ERISA. After this case, it was noted that ERISA will only prohibit certain types of PBM regulation. Laws that require plans to cover specific benefits, laws that bind plan administrators to specific rules for determining beneficiary status, and laws that create acute indirect economic effects on a plan that force a plan to adopt a certain scheme of coverage. Simply stated, as long as the state PBM laws do not attempt to mandate specific plan coverage, they do have the right to attempt to help control costs. And so how I've always said it is essentially, if they are not targeting the plan, they can target the PBM. At this point, over 45 states have passed some sort of state law regulating PBMs, some with more plan impact than others. We have been discussing the regulations with clients who may be impacted and helping them understand what the state laws may mean for their plan in the future. And the conversations tend to lean heavily on the patient steerage and spread pricing concerns. So patient steerage is when a PBM either incentivizes or penalizes a member to use their retail pharmacy, mail order, or specialty pharmacy. While this regulation has been discussed in quite a few states, it has actually not gained as much traction as one would believe. The biggest impact this would have is to the contract negotiation process, and the PBM could no longer tie financial penalty or incentive to encourage use of their PBM-owned retail, mail, or specialty pharmacies. This would impact almost every PBM contract, and we are still modeling the impact it would have on the market as a whole. This law is designed to protect independent retail pharmacies who are struggling to keep patients in their doors and get those patients in their doors whenever those members are being told by their PBM they must go to a specific site. The next regulation has been much more popular. As many of you may already know this, over 90% of self-funded carve-out plans are in a traditional arrangement that allows for spread pricing. As a reminder, spread pricing is typically when a PBM bills the plan sponsor a different amount than what they reimburse the retail pharmacy billing the claim. So in a few states, they have passed spread pricing laws, and they've focused on a newer model called NADAC, the National Average Drug Acquisition Cost. This pricing model was developed as a reimbursement model for Medicaid and has only been adapted by a few PBMs. NADAC pricing comes from a survey of actual acquisition costs from retail pharmacies. These laws require that a retail pharmacy be reimbursed under NADAC or actual acquisition cost, meaning the pharmacy would be reimbursed closer to what they paid for the medication. One of the unique attributes of NADAC drug pricing is that the data is posted on Medicaid.gov and can be accessed by anyone, unlike traditional PBM pricing, which can be obscure and can only be found through a few private companies after you purchase a license to access it. In the case of the few PBMs contracting with the NADAC model, the only source of revenue is the administration fee. But with that said, there are a few downfalls to the NADAC model. One being that not all retail pharmacies respond to the survey. And those also happen to be the larger chains like Walgreens and CVS. And we believe that if those entities started submitting NADAC, the contracts with the PBMs using this model will only get stronger. The other downfall is that not all drugs have a NADAC price. We have found within our book of business, over 99% of the prescription drugs processed will have a NADAC price, but the remaining 1% are also the highest cost with the lowest utilized medications. Those are brand and specialty drugs. So in cases where that situation arises, average wholesale price minus a discount would be used. These laws for NADAC or actual acquisition do not impact any type of rebates collected from manufacturers. So in addition to these two regulations, there are others still pending that could gain traction in the next few years. Among those are requiring the PBM to act as a fiduciary partner and in good faith on behalf of their clients. There is also a push for consumer transparency, pharmacy pricing transparency, and also a few states also looking into banning clawbacks of reimbursement from the retail pharmacies. So most of these laws and regulations being discussed actually mirror most of the federal regulations being discussed. And so that's enough. We're done talking about state and federal laws, I promise. Nothing else that's boring, I hope. So the next topic is everyone's biggest concern, and that's specialty drugs. So if you take a look at this slide, what you can see is that around 8 years ago, we started talking about the specialty boom. Think back about 8 years. At that time, the hot topic was Hep C. So your Hep C drugs like Sovaldi and Harvoni were all over the news. If you remember, think back to the TV commercials, everybody was saying, go get tested for Hep C. It's really important if you're a baby boomer. So those medications were breakthrough medications with what we believed were absolutely insane price tags for over $90,000 for the treatment, the 3-month treatment of Sovaldi, and the $120,000 for the Harvoni. And since then, the market has settled a little bit. We're no longer seeing that total 8%. We're hovering right around 7.5%. But it's not slowing down as much as we had hoped to see. We do believe that 2022 is going to edge closer to that 8% increase in cost. And if we were to look back at 2015, I think we all do it with kind of googly eyes right now, wishing for the cheaper days of only $120,000 for the drug costs and not these $2 million drugs that are hitting the market. So it is estimated that the new cost of specialty medications that have been approved by the FDA will increase plan spend by roughly $62 billion a year. That's an additional 8% increase over current. Most of these medications will target orphan disease categories. As a reminder, orphan drugs treat diseases that affect over or under 200,000 people in the United States. So while it might be a while before your plan experiences one of these high cost claims, you likely will not be able to avoid them forever. And unfortunately, some plans are having to make tough decisions that could impact members. 46% of plans already require exclusive specialty through mail order in order to try to control some cost. And then in some cases like gene therapy, they may require a member go through a specific medical benefit to get those medications. And then 30% of plans are also placing biosimilars on a preferred tier to incentivize members to try to lower cost. Even though a few plans have made some drastic plan design changes, the cost of specialty drugs on a per employee basis increased by 11% in 2021, and we will likely see that number hover above 13% for 2022. Multi-million-dollar drugs or treatments are becoming more common. Plans are left footing the bill and wondering what, if anything, they can do to stop the bleeding. The cost of the pipeline is not sustainable for most plans. With 5 to 10 new gene therapies coming to the market every year, each with an estimated price tag of $2 million, the chances of getting hit with one or more of these catastrophic claims is on the rise. According to an analysis completed by OptumRx, as more of these drugs become available, the risk does increase. On average, a 1,000 life group has a 0.05% chance of seeing a gene therapy claim by 2024. By 2029, that increase goes up to 2%, or that chance becomes 2%. So for a 5,000 life group in that same time frame, a plan goes from a 2.4% to an 18% chance of getting a gene therapy claim. And if you were to jump up to a 15,000 life group, a plan has a 45% chance of seeing a gene therapy by 2029. And the risk may not be worth, or may be worth it for some of the larger groups, but for smaller groups, this could be catastrophic, which is why we see a lot of movement in the risk protection space. The high price of the medications, millions of dollars in some cases, threaten coverage and access to patients who may benefit. As of September 22nd, the FDA has approved over a dozen gene therapy products, including Zolgensma, $2.1 million per claim, Luxturna, the cheaper of the two, at $850,000 per claim, and Zynteglo was recently approved at the $2.8 million per claim. Most recently, the FDA also granted accelerated approval for Skysona at $3 million per claim, and the cost of gene therapies is expected to reach $17 billion in the US by 2027. That's just gene therapy, not counting the additional the specialty that have come to the market. Pharmacy benefit managers have been working diligently to develop solutions that provide employer-sponsored plans access to these high-cost therapies at a financially predictable cost. Since some of these therapies may be curative, even the large upfront price tag could ultimately be less expensive than the expected long-term ongoing cost of the claims. Express Scripts has partnered with Evacor for medical management services to provide employer-sponsored plans with a capitated gene therapy solution called Embark Benefit Protection. Both ESI and Evacor are part of the Cigna Evernorth family of companies and healthcare solutions. Employers opting into Embark would pay a 99-cent per member per month to give members of their plan access to gene therapy, included in the program. Currently Zolgensma, Luxturna, and Zynteglo as of August 22. If a patient is prescribed any treatment under the Embark program, the cost of the drug would be covered by a prepaid per member per month charge. However, any inpatient cost of administration, for example, would be the responsibility of the plan. The program also includes various utilization management protocols to ensure appropriate use under the covered therapies. As the FDA approves more of gene therapies, the list of covered therapies is expected to expand, determined by Evacor, which may result in a reevaluation of the PMPM cost.
OptumRx began offering its gene therapy protection program effective January 1, 2022. The program aims to provide patients access to ultra-high cost gene therapies at a financially predictable cost. The product currently covers Luxturna, Zolgensma, Zynteglo, as well as 2 other gene therapies expected to enter into the market next year. Like ESI, this program will require participants to pay a flat per member per month fee that provides coverage for the cost of clinically appropriate gene therapies. At this time, the program is currently available to employers with at least 5,000 enrolled lives, but this will decrease significantly to a minimum of 101 lives as of July 2023. To further help mitigate financial volatility surrounding the gene therapies, the risk protection program includes quality management services such as utilization management, prior authorization, and appeals to ensure clinically appropriate use of these therapies for administering and coverage. To further manage costs, when expected clinical outcomes are not met, Optum is currently negotiating outcome-based contracts with manufacturers.
Unlike ESI and Optum, CVS has taken a different approach to mitigating the high cost of gene therapies, offering plan sponsors a stop-loss product for those employers without traditional stop-loss currently. Clients can choose a policy for gene therapy coverage with 3 different deductible options, and coverage includes the cost of the gene therapy product. Associated costs include facility and physician charges, which are covered by the client's base medical plan, are not included, and members must receive the gene therapy product through Aetna's network of gene therapy providers in order to qualify for gene therapy stop-loss reimbursement. CVS also offers clients the option of an installment payment plan. Though the client is ultimately responsible for the entire cost of treatment, they are able to make payments over several years, mitigating the immediate financial impact of the claim, smoothing the impact of an immediate large incurred cost. The option is available for select FDA-approved gene therapy products dispensed through CVS Specialty, and payment terms are client-specific. Once a client has opted in and a patient receives treatment, the client remains responsible for the entire cost, regardless of whether the beneficiary is still covered under the plan. Absent these programs, the same therapies will likely still be covered under traditional stop-loss contracts. In fact, some stop-loss carriers are developing financial risk mitigation solutions themselves.
So the key is making sure you have protection from these high-cost therapies, either through a traditional stop-loss or these unique solutions outlined here, but not both. We want to make sure that you are not paying the premium twice for the same coverage. Please discuss this option with your account team internally. We would love to talk to you about these. And up next, we're discussing the all-important topic of biosimilars. Michelle.
All right, thanks, Shannon. We want to spend a moment talking about biosimilars. Biologics generally come from living ingredients, which can include animal cells and microorganisms such as yeast and bacteria. The biologic is typically what we call a specialty brand medication. Biologics are different from conventional medications, which are commonly made from chemicals. Due to the complexity of biologic drugs, it is not possible to create an exact chemical replica. So an alternative for a biologic is not a generic, as they are not identical to the originating specialty brand medication. Biosimilar or biosimilarity means that the biological product is highly similar to the reference product, notwithstanding minor differences in clinical inactive components, and there are no clinically meaningful differences between the biological product and the reference product in terms of the clinical outcomes, safety, purity, and potency of the product. Once a drug has been shown to be biosimilar to a reference medication, aka the original biologic, it can be approved for all of the same conditions as that reference medication, even if it hasn't been specifically tested for each condition. Many plans are holding out that the growing list of FDA-approved biosimilars will bring some financial relief. As of September 2022, there were 39 FDA-approved biosimilars. As mentioned a few moments ago, 30% of plans have already introduced plan design changes in order to prefer a biosimilar over its brand counterpart, but that only works if the biosimilar medications hit their PBM's formulary. While it's still too soon to tell, we believe that some vendors will use the release of the biosimilars as an opportunity to renegotiate their rebate contracts with the originating manufacturer. If they are successful in their renegotiations, it is likely the brand specialty will remain preferred over the biosimilar. This is causing concern for some plans since they would have to pay upfront for the more expensive medication in hopes for a lower net drug cost after rebates are paid. I always equate this to overpaying on your taxes in order to have a larger return at the end of the tax season. It's not always the most financially advantageous for plans since they have to wait so long for the rebates. In addition to low utilization due to formulary decisions, biosimilars may take a while to decrease overall plan spend, even if covered by the PBM. While producing a generic drug is fairly easy, the production of a biosimilar requires highly specialized knowledge and expertise and capital investment. Biosimilars are mostly injected or infused, meaning their production facilities are highly specialized and are not easily transferable to the production of other drugs. This means companies producing biosimilars face higher upfront fixed costs in development, establishment of facilities, and higher marginal costs in production. Even with these uphill production challenges, biosimilar sales continue to grow. According to McKinsey's biosimilars market model, the market is set to continue its double-digit growth, doubling in size to more than $30 billion by 2025 and over $60 billion by the end of the decade. The most talked about approval by far is the Humira biosimilars that have been approved and are expected to hit the US market by 2022. As of today, it is unclear if the big three PBMs will prefer brand over the biosimilar. In addition to the Humira, the FDA recently approved the biosimilar of Cimerli, which is used to treat retinal disease. This drug is interchangeable with Lucentis, which is also utilized to treat retinal disease. This medication is to help with retaining vision and potentially even gaining vision when administered once a month via an injection in the eye. There is anesthesia used during administration of this drug. Duration of treatment is dependent on the disease indicator. And this biosimilar has an estimated release date of October 2022. The biosimilar of Myfembree was approved by the FDA to treat endometriosis due to premenopausal in women. Women who are approved for this medication take 1 pill per day for up to 24 months to decrease their endometriosis diagnosis. Estimated release date was August 2022. The biosimilar of Neulasta, which is used to treat infections in patients who are undergoing myelosuppressive chemotherapy. Patients with non-myeloid cancer are more prone to infections while having chemotherapy administered to combat this type of cancer. Stimufend is estimated to be released in early 2023 as a 6 milligram pre-filled syringe. This will be administered once per chemotherapy cycle for each medically eligible patient. The biosimilar of Sotyktu, approved by the FDA to treat severe plaque psoriasis within adults, a patient would need to be approved for systemic therapy or phototherapy in order to take this biosimilar. This biosimilar is an oral medication that the patient would take daily. With treatment, patients during the trial were able to achieve results of clear skin. The estimated release date of this biosimilar is September 2022. And currently, the average cost per 30 days from one patient is $6,164.
So as you can tell, some of these biosimilars are late to the market. We were hoping to see a little bit more information on them. The information we received is not the best, September, August, those types of dates, but these are really tricky medications to release to the market. So again, kind of jumping into the comment I made earlier, it would be beneficial for plan sponsors to determine their specialty coverage of biosimilars as more start to hit the market. This is not new. There are biosimilars currently already on the market. It's just these are the more popular drugs that are going to be coming to the market in the very near future. So replacing certain specialty brand medications with the comparable biosimilars could potentially have a great financial savings to your plan. And so we know that it's not likely to see huge decreases in overall plan spend over the next few years. At Reimagine RX, we've been working hard for our clients to try to help lower plan spend through negotiations of contracts and through plan design recommendations, things like that. And we're doing a great job at that. At least I'm going to toot my own horn on that. From 2019 to 2021, we were successful at keeping our book of business below benchmark. Our traditional non-specialty trend is sitting right around 3% right now, while the national benchmark is around 8%. And our specialty trend, while not as low, it's still lower than benchmark, which is 11%. Our number is sitting around 9%. And so we are doing everything we can to try to keep your costs down by helping negotiate all of those contracts. So these trends are currently only being controlled by contract negotiations with the PBM partners, and also by helping clients determine which trend management programs make the most sense for them. And while we are thrilled that our clients are seeing lower than average increases in cost, we know it's not enough to make up the difference of the crazy pipeline. So in addition to the annual RFI, which we invite over 25 PBMs to complete every single year, our questionnaire is around 600 questions at this point. We also request that they provide summaries of their differentiators. So we've also been researching newer solutions, not just completing the questionnaires with different PBMs. And of course, they, as previously mentioned, risk protection programs for specialty, and there are trend management programs to help keep costs down. But there are also other solutions. Specialty carve-out has become a huge topic. We at least once a week get a question from a client looking at these new models. And while this option is not for every plan, we have seen some success with our current clients in this program. Keeping in mind that specialty carve-out savings are completely done by capturing alternative funding. And so while this solution can save a lot of money in specialty spend, it may not be fit for all, and it still has a lot of risk involved in the process. Please discuss this option with your plan if you're interested, or with your account team if you are interested. So kind of stepping back, what is alternative funding? Alternative funding, most of the available funds being provided are through grants and our needs-based alternative funding, which depends on the employee's income and family situation, which does not always guarantee that they'll be approved for additional funding. Some specialty medications are not even included in the program, and many alternative funding programs address fewer than 300, mostly branded name drugs. It also excludes around 1,300 specialty medications, generic and brand, from being covered under the benefit. So again, there could be some potential savings from the 300 claims or 300 different medications being captured, but it is not capturing the entire market of specialty medications. Keep in mind that if you do engage in one of these programs, you are at risk of additional fees, loss PBM contract value, specifically in the rebates, and lack of clinical review visibility that may negate savings and increase medical utilization or expense. The biggest concern we have on one of these situations is we block it from pharmacy, member turns around and fills it over at the medical. And so it doesn't change the fact that you're paying for the medication, it just shifts it over to the medical. And removing a segment of medications impacts underwriting provisions, and changes the terms of your pharmacy contract. And in addition to the contract, most alternative funding programs require a change in your summary plan documents that note specific medications in the funding are not covered in order to be eligible for the funding. So in changing that language, there is a risk that the member does not qualify for alternative funding, and the plan must then decide whether or not they want to cover that medication under the pharmacy benefit, with the understanding that stop loss may not be willing to pick up the cost to the plan, as the plan design documents now say that these medications are not covered. These concerns are normally what holds us back from completely recommending the program to more plans. As mentioned, we do believe that it is a great fit for some plans, but would again recommend discussing this with your team, loop us in if necessary. We'd be happy to have some time talking to you about these programs. And the final topic of today's call is bolt-on programs. So a bolt-on program is anything that's outside of your pharmacy benefit that you add to as an additional benefit to your plan. Over the past few years, as carve-out PBM has become more popular, bolt-on programs specializing in specific diseases or utilization programs have become more popular. It is important to note that some of these programs I'm about to discuss with you are not allowed by every PBM. Enrolling in one or more of these programs may not be allowed, and if the PBM is willing to allow the program, there may be a financial impact to the plan from contracting standpoint. Some of these programs like Virta, Tria, Hinge Health, and Headspace specialize in specific indication management, but not all do it the same way. Some programs encourage patient adherence as a way to save money, while others are focusing on the member's lifestyle, including diet, exercise, and stress management. Each vendor has their own cost, normally a PMPM fee or a shared savings model. There is also a growing sector of bolt-on programs that promise lower plan costs through member engagement. These programs reach out directly to the members to help them find lower cost alternatives to their medications. They target everything from switching site of care all the way to switching from a capsule to a tablet or a cream or a lotion. Same medications, just a different treatment option, different dosing process. This is considered a softer approach compared to some trend management programs that either deny medications flat out or require a member to jump through multiple hoops for medications. Again, as mentioned previously, each vendor charges a PMPM or a shared savings. And for larger populations, there is typically a return on the investment. And finally, sitting in the middle between carve-out, specialty, and true bolt-on programs is a relatively new concept. And it has been around for a few years, but it's gaining traction. And that's carving out prior authorization. It's being offered by a few different vendors right now. This program separates the clinical criteria from the rebate. One of the bigger concerns that we have in the pharmacy space is that utilization is directly tied to rebate payments, which in some cases also means it's tied to PBM revenue sources. And allowing the company who negotiates the rebate while also allowing them to write the clinical criteria can leave some room for bias in the approval process. And so what we've seen in situations like this, the prior authorization approval rating could decrease from around 90% of an approval rate to around 65 to 70% approval rates. And while this can be disruptive because lower approval rate means members are directly impacted, it doesn't necessarily mean that the program is a negative. Quite a few plans have found carving out prior authorization does help control costs, while also allowing those members who need their medications get those medications. These programs vary in engagement, but almost every single one of these bolt-on programs has the same punchline. Plans will save 15 to 20% by enrolling in our program. While this may be true in some cases, how does a plan determine which is the real deal and which is smoke and mirrors? Like I said, we vet out these programs with each of the PBMs, as well as working with our internal teams to find out which new plans and programs are popping up. Everybody knows that these programs come up overnight, so we have to spend quite a bit of time. Typically, it takes about 6 months to a year to vet out one of these new programs. And so Reimagine RX also spends time working with you to make sure that that client or that group is a fit for your plan. We want to make sure that it's not just signing up, spending an extra 99 cents PMPM, and you have zero cost savings on the back end. So we do have a few favorites. We won't name names. And I'm happy to discuss with you during your annual review. So please feel free to reach out to your account team if you do have interest in any of the bolt-on programs. And that officially concludes our webinar for today. I think I called it at 45 minutes. So we do have a few questions, and I will
You want me to read? I do have a few questions that I see here, Shannon. And I can start with the first one. This person wants to know how much is spent treating illnesses and harm done by automatically denying specialty medications, forcing employees to wait weeks for a lengthy and messy bureaucracy of reviewing an appeal. And then does your answer take into account any loss of productivity that the company may face as well?
Yeah, and so that's one of the reasons that we refrain, we'll say, from recommending these types of programs to most plans. Every plan kind of wants to hear about the specialty carve out and some of the bolt-on programs, the member engagement, soft block type programs, but we do take a step back, make sure that it makes sense for our members and their plan, so your plan. So to answer, we don't have any type of studies that have been done of what happens when denying medication, but typically the denial does have an appeals process. So if that member needs that medication, there is always going to be an appeals, and then there's always a secondary appeals if you still don't agree with that outcome. So members, provider would get involved in those situations. So it's not just the PBM making the decision at the end of the day.
Okay, thanks, Shannon. I do see one more question regarding biosimilars, and this person wants to know what our clients are doing or what your book is doing around biosimilars.
Yeah, so that's a great question. As of right now, we're kind of in a sit and watch scenario. Like we said in the biosimilar discussion, a lot of PBMs haven't really made a stance or reached out to us to say what they're going to do. We've reached out to the big three to ask those questions of what are they going to do when it comes to biosimilars? Are they going to be a preferred tier 1 or tier 2 instead of the branded originator medication, or are those specialty brands going to be preferred over the biosimilar? So as of right now, we're kind of sitting in that area where it's an unknown. With that said, we have seen an uptick in plan design changes where plans are starting to put a generic or biosimilar tier instead of just having a flat specialty tier.
Okay, thanks, Shannon. I believe that's all the questions we have for today. If you do have a question or any additional questions, we'll be happy to respond to you after the webinar today. And once again, we want to thank you for joining us. And as a reminder, a copy of the recording from this webinar, as well as details for accessing CE credits, will be shared with you within the next 24 hours. So with that, I just wish you a wonderful afternoon, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.